I come here with actually the biggest business delegation I've ever traveled with, 40 strong, including the maritime cluster, so shipping and icebreakers, including technology, networks and quantum, both hardware and software, including mining, including the defense industry. And I think there's so much synergy that we can have. In many ways, I actually see Canada as an honorary member of the European Union and the Nordics as well. So we'll be talking not only shop, but also things related to Russia and Ukraine and probably the Middle East. So we look forward to the 48 hours.
That line wasn't casual. It wasn't diplomatic small talk. And it definitely wasn't accidental. Because when the president of Finland stands on Parliament Hill and says Canada belongs with Europe, he's not just making a compliment, he's signaling a shift in alliances, a shift in power, and possibly a shift away from the traditional center of global influence. But here's what most people missed. He didn't come alone. He came with 40 companies, 4 signed agreements, and a long-term strategy that goes far beyond a single visit. So the real question isn't what he said. The real question is, what exactly did Finland just offer Canada and why now? 40 companies, not symbolic, not ceremonial. This was the largest business delegation Finland's president has ever brought anywhere in the world. Not Washington, not Beijing, not Tokyo, Ottawa. And that alone should tell you this wasn't a visit. This was a calculation. Because countries don't deploy economic firepower like this unless they see something others don't.
Now, with that in mind, I'm pleased to announce that yesterday Nokia has signed a memorandum of understanding with Export Development Canada to collaborate on AI gigafactories. Nokia builds communication infrastructure to enable the world's AI connectivity. We are also bringing this intelligence to the edge of the battlefield in Ukraine and into headquarters in NATO. The old divide between civilian and military communications is no longer quite so distinct. Instead, we focus now on identifying dual-use capabilities.
In 48 hours, 4 major agreements were signed. Arctic and maritime cooperation AI and sovereign technology partnerships, intelligence sharing negotiations, industrial collaboration with Nokia. That's not a press cycle. That's infrastructure. And when you combine that with a 40-company delegation across defense, quantum, computing, mining, telecommunications, you start to see the pattern. Finland isn't exploring Canada. Finland is integrating with it because timing is everything. And right now, the global system is shifting. Trade is no longer just economic, it's strategic. Technology is no longer neutral. It's weaponized, and alliances are no longer permanent. They're conditional. This is what Finland's president called an age of unpeace, where the tools that once connected countries are now being used to divide them. And in that kind of world, countries don't just trade, they choose sides. Now, here's where this gets even more interesting. This entire shift didn't start in Ottawa. It started in Davos months earlier, when Mark Carney delivered a speech about rupture, a world where the old system no longer guarantees stability. And Finland's president didn't just hear that speech, he called it one of the best of the entire forum. That matters, because leaders don't reorganize economic strategy based on flattery. They do it based on alignment. And what Finland saw in Canada was alignment. Let's talk about the number that quietly reshapes this entire story. 5% of GDP. That's the joint defense and security target both countries are now working toward by 2035. Now on paper, that sounds like a long-term goal. But in reality, it's a signal. Because reaching 5% means massive industrial expansion, defense manufacturing scale-up, long-term procurement pipelines, strategic autonomy. And when countries commit to that level of spending, they're not preparing for stability, they're preparing for uncertainty. Now, here's the part that should really make you pause. When Finland's president said, if you combine Canada and the Nordic countries, you get the 4th largest economy in the world. That wasn't hypothetical, that was math. Canada, $2.5 trillion Nordics combined, $1.9 trillion total, over $4.4 trillion. That places this bloc ahead of Japan, India in nominal terms. And suddenly, Canada doesn't look isolated anymore. It looks connected, strategically, economically, and potentially geopolitically, because this isn't a clean shift, not yet. Roughly 75% of Canada's exports still go to the United States. That's not a small detail. That's structural dependency. And even Finland's president acknowledged it. This partnership does not replace the US. It complements it, at least for now, which means Canada isn't choosing between alliances. It's trying to build leverage within them. So now we arrive at the real tension, because two things can be true at the same time. This partnership is real, and its limits are also real. The agreements are signed, but the outcomes are not guaranteed. The strategy is clear, but the timeline is long, and the global system still unstable. Extended final analysis, deeper layer. This is where the story shifts from events to implications. Because what happened in Ottawa isn't just about Finland, and it's not just about Canada. It's about what happens when mid-sized powers stop waiting for global leadership and start building their own frameworks instead. For decades, the assumption was simple. Global stability flows through a central system. Trade flows in predictable directions. Alliances follow established lines. But that assumption is breaking down. And what Finland and Canada are doing here, quietly, methodically, is testing a different model. A model built on trusted partners, not just powerful ones, shared capabilities, not just shared values, resilience over dependence. Because in a world where supply chains can be cut, where technology can be restricted, and where trade can be weaponized, the question is no longer, who is your biggest partner? The question is, who can you rely on when it matters most? And that's what this visit was really about. Not optics, not headlines, reliability. 40 companies didn't come to Ottawa to observe. They came to position themselves, to build inside Canada's industrial base, to connect systems, to align supply chains, because once those connections are built, they're not easily undone. And that's the deeper layer here. This isn't about a single agreement. It's about creating a network that can function even if the old system stops working the way it used to. Now, does that mean Canada is shifting away from its traditional alliances? Not exactly, but it does mean something else. Canada is preparing for a world where it might have to operate differently, where flexibility matters more than loyalty, where diversification matters more than dependence, and where partnerships are built not just for growth, but for survival. And that's why this moment matters. Because most people saw a diplomatic visit, but underneath it, there was something much bigger taking shape. And there's one more layer that makes this even more consequential: speed. Because in geopolitics, timing isn't just important, it's everything. What Finland did here wasn't slow diplomacy, it was fast alignment. 3 months from a speech in Davos to a full-scale delegation in Ottawa, from an idea to signed agreements, from words to structure. That kind of acceleration only happens when both sides believe the window is limited. And that's the signal. Not just that this partnership exists, but that it's being built quickly enough to matter before the global landscape shifts again. Because if trade tensions escalate, if security alliances tighten, if supply chains fracture further, the countries that moved early will have options. The ones that waited won't. And that brings us to the strategic risk in all of this, because building parallel partnerships is powerful, but it also requires balance. Too much shift too fast, and you create friction with existing allies. Too little movement, and you get left behind as others reorganize. So what Canada is attempting here is incredibly precise. Expand without provoking. Diversify without destabilizing. Strengthen without isolating. And that's not easy, because every agreement signed with Europe, every industrial link built with Nordic partners, quietly changes the equation. Not overnight, but gradually, until one day the structure looks different than it did before. And by the time everyone notices, it's already in place. That's how realignment happens, not through one announcement, but through a series of moves that on their own seem incremental, but together become irreversible. So here's the bottom line. Finland didn't just bring companies, it brought a strategy. Canada didn't just host a visit, it stepped into a new role, and whether this becomes a defining shift or just another missed opportunity depends on what happens next, because in moments like this, the difference isn't what's announced, it's what gets built. And we're going to be tracking every piece of it, And if you find this helpful, hit like, subscribe, hit the bell.